Hello and welcome to Thank You for Your Service. My name is Tom Heiser and I will be your host. Today we have the opportunity to interview with Larry Weinfurter, who spent 20 years in the U.S. Navy, primarily in submarines. Larry, thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Okay, starting out with you. Where are you from and what schools did you attend?
I'm from Sherry, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And I attended St. Killian's Catholic School in Blanker. And then I went to high school at Lincoln in Wisconsin Rapids.
Okay. And graduated from Lincoln High School?
I graduated from Lincoln.
Okay. Did you go to college after high school?
No, I didn't. I joined the Navy, and so that's where I was at that time.
Okay. Why the Navy?
When I was in about 5th grade, I decided I wanted to go in the Navy. And I didn't really have any real reason, probably, but I had a couple of uncles that were in World War II, or cousins rather, and I just decided I wanted to go Navy.
Okay, were they Navy veterans also?
Yes.
Okay. So how old were you when you entered the Navy?
I was 18. I went in October 1957. So I went to boot camp in Great Lakes, and after boot camp, I had signed up to be a machinist mate, so I went to machinist mate school at Great Lakes. And the first week of machinist mate school, or second week, they said, anybody that wants to sign up for submarines, you only have this one chance to do it. And I wasn't going to. I didn't know about submarines. And one of the guys I was in school with, got to be a friend with him, and he said, let's go for submarines. I says, why? He says, you get paid more. I said, here I am. So we found out the last week of machinist mate school, in order to get to sub school, you had to carry above a 90 average. And lo and behold, I was above that, but the guy that talked me into it, he didn't make it. So then I was off to sub school.
Okay, machinist mate. What was your job like then as a machinist mate?
Well, machinist mate is basically steam propulsion. And in 20 years, I never worked on steam. I was on submarines, and part of that reason they were pushing for submarine duty was this is when the Navy was doing a big build-up for the nuclear power Navy. And I didn't want to go nuclear power, but that's the way it was. So I got on submarines, and that's the way it was.
Okay, so those submarines that you were initially on, they were diesel?
The first one I was on was the USS Tang. It was a newer class of diesel submarine. It was kind of a prototype prior to going nuclear, as far as hull design and stuff. So the Tang class, it was a fairly new boat when I got to it. So it was entirely different than what I went to sub school for. But I really liked the Tang. It was a good boat all the way around.
So when you joined up, what did you think military life was going to be like?
I didn't have a clue. I didn't mind it at all. I born and raised on a farm, so work was no problem. And in boot camp, I gained 15 pounds. Half of our company were from Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, New York. They were all losing weight, and I was gaining weight.
So when you went in, you get to boot camp, nervous?
No, that didn't bother me none. Boot camp was something you had to do. They told you to do push-ups, you did push-ups and whatever else. So.
Okay. So you're going to be a machinist mate. About how long was that school, roughly?
I think it was 12 or 16 weeks of school. Machinist mate covers all your auxiliary equipment, air conditioning, hydraulics, any mechanical thing that you have, basically machinist mates. and enginemen do basically the same type of work on. In Navy, it's primarily a steam propulsion, but like I said, I was doing the auxiliary part of it always.
Okay, so your first duty station was a Tang, you said.
Well, after I finished machinist mate school, then I went to sub school in New London, Connecticut. That was 12 weeks. That was in April, May, and June or something like that. And so I finished up sub school. Then I got orders to the Tang, which was home ported in Hawaii. But when I was headed out that way, I found out that Tang was on Westpac, which is Western Pacific, and so they flew me to Tokyo and picked up the submarine in Yokosuka, Japan. And it was a 24-hour flight from California. We went from Treasure Island, we went from there to Hawaii, to Wake, Guam, and then to Tokyo. And it was 24 hours in the air.
So you're up in the air going to a submarine.
Going to the submarine, right. Reported on board the Tang in Yokosuka. And then right after I got on board, we went on special operations up, I don't know where it went. Most of our deployments, we didn't know where we were going. They'd head out. All I had to do was keep my equipment running, and that's all they cared.
Okay, so you're in Japan. What'd you think of Japan?
Oh, I love Japan. I got over there quite a few different times later on different Westpac cruises and different submarines. We got into, Yokosuka. We were in Kobe, Sasebo. I got in, went to Kamakura just on a trip to see where it was, and that's where the big Buddha is. If you've seen these great big Buddha. And so I got to Tokyo a few times. But I enjoyed Japan every time I was over there.
Okay. Remember other people that were on that ship too?
As far as the first submarine, I didn't keep track of too many of them. There was a couple of them. One of them ended up on Thresher, the one that nuclear submarine that went down. He was on board, and he was third class I seaman. He's the only one I knew that was on the Thresher when it sunk. But that was a long time ago, and that was back in 1959. So when you first get on submarines, you have to qualify. And you see the submarine dolphins like these right here. You have to earn that pin, and in order to get to be qualified on submarines, you have to learn everything about it. And I'm talking every pipe, every valve, everything all the way through the submarine. So they give you 6 months to learn all this stuff. We have, they call them tab books that showed all the piping system and everything. But when you went through the systems, they'll come up and say, okay, we're talking air systems. The air leaves the compressor at 3,000 pounds, and then it goes through, and every compartment you have to say what is supplied by different air pressures. Water systems, same thing, everything through the boat. So when you get to your final qualifications, you go through and they'll point to this valve. What does this do? Where does it go? How does it work? What's this over here? What's this? And all the way through the boat, you have to learn everything. You have to know how to operate most of the equipment, including sonar equipment. Radio, they tell you what everything is. You have to know what's in there, but you don't really have to know how to operate it. And so when you're qualifying, you have to be able to shoot a torpedo. You have to be able to, do any job that's available, because if you're in there and you have a catastrophe or something, they close the bulkhead doors between the compartments. Maybe you're the only one in there that knows where, everybody should know where everything is at. But you normally don't work there, so you still have to know how everything operates.
So the radio man would have to know a little bit about the piping system also.
Oh, they go through to everything. The cook has to know all of that. Everybody has to know all the way through the submarine. They have to know how to fire a torpedo in case something happens, where the shutoff valves are, where everything is for emergency situations. The lights go out. In the battle lanterns, you can't see very well, or if you're wearing an oxygen breathing mask over your face, you have to know how to operate everything regardless of what the situation.
How long were you assigned to that sub?
I was on the Tang. I got on there in July 58. 58 to 62. So most time you're on board, maybe 3 years most. Then you get transferred, but things will change, and sometimes you're there a little longer. And while I was on the Tang, orders came through and said Tang had to supply 2 people for recommissioning of the lizard fish. And they wanted a qualified fireman, which is your low rate when you first get in the Navy. And they wanted a qualified chief engineman. Well, I just got qualified, and this chief engineman just made chief, and so they said, "You're going to lizard fish." So we went and recommissioned lizard fish in September '59. We were on board 3 months. And after we recommissioned it, we turned it over to the Italian Navy in the Lend-Lease program. So in January of '60, the submarine went to Italy with the Italian Navy. So I requested to go back to Tang. We could put in our request where we wanted to go, so I said I'd go back to Tang. And so that's where I went, and I got back on board and made another Westpac cruise.
So when you qualified for the Tang, do you have to requalify for that?
Yeah, every submarine you go to, you have to requalify. A lot of the systems are basically the same, so it's not a real big problem to be qualified, but you still have to know where everything is on the new submarine that you're going to. The big problem was when I got on board the nuclear submarine. It is drastically different, and but you still have to qualify, and they give you. Well, a new guy coming on board always has a year to qualify on the nuclear submarines, and for a requal, usually about 6 months. They expect you to have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
So when you went on the Tang, you and other sailors were in qualification. What happens if somebody washes out and can't qualify?
You're out of submarine service.
You're back up on top.
Right, wherever they want to send you, but you're definitely not staying on submarines.
One-shot deal.
Right, you get one chance, and if you get qualified, but if you don't qualify, you're off.
No second opportunities.
No.
What it is. Okay, so you're on the Tang. Your initial enlistment was for how many years, do you recall?
I joined Navy for 4 years, and then I was ready to be leaving the Tang in October of, let's see, that would have been 61. And we just come off a spec op, and I had my sea bag packed. I was heading for discharge. Mm-hmm. XO called me into the stateroom. He says, "Weinfurter, I have something you'd like to see." I said, "Oh, what would that be?" He says, "You're hereby involuntarily extended for 6 months. Berlin crisis, when they had the Berlin airlift, they were holding in certain rates. They didn't hold all rates in, they just held in certain ones. Machinist mate was one of them, so I had 6 months more to do." So I took 30 days leave, Went down to Hotel Street a couple of times. But I got out of the Navy then, and I was looking for jobs. There's nothing available because National Guard Division from Wisconsin was called into Fort Lewis, Washington. And they said they had to give them their jobs back. And since I was working on the farm, I didn't have a job to go back to. So my mom says, did you think about going back in the Navy? And I said, well, not really. But she said, well, did you like it? I said, well, yeah, I liked it all right. She said, why don't you go back in for a couple of years? So I went down to the recruiting office and decided to re-enlist. I was going to go for 2 years, and they said, no, we don't have a 2-year program. And so I said, how about 3 years? Well, okay, we'll let you go for 3 years. So I got in, and after I was in for a while, they kept pushing me. They wanted me to go to nuclear power school, and I didn't want to do that. My math wasn't very good, and so I figured I wasn't going to go to nuke school. So anyway, they let me back in the Navy for 3 years. I got on board the Sea Poacher in Key West, Florida, and every time my enlistment come close or something, they were after me again to go to nuke school. Well, I never had enough time, and I didn't want to go, so I wouldn't go for 4 years. So I extended, well, I was eligible for shore duty. After you have a certain number of years of sea duty, you're eligible for shore duty. And I had 4 years or 4.5 years on the Tang, and I was on the Sea Poacher for 3. And they said, they wanted me to sign up to go nuke school. No, I'm not going to do that. So looked for overseas shore duty billets that I was eligible for, and Naples, Italy was there. I put in for Puerto Rico and a few others, but they said, no, can't send you there. And they said, would you go to Naples? I said, yeah. I'll extend for Naples. I'm not going to re-enlist. So I extended for 3 years and went to Naples, Italy, and I was attached to International Motor Pool over there. We supplied cars for transportation in Allied Forces Southern Europe. We had, I think it was 23 flag officers there, and each flag officer had his own car and had to have a driver. And the motor pool I was in, we had other jobs other than driving for the admirals and colonels and whoever else was there. I drove a truck delivering food to the underground NATO headquarters, and which was an ideal job. And so that was the time I passed the test for chief, E7, and in NATO you have all branches of service. You got Army, Navy, Air Force, and you have we didn't have any Marines there, but we had Italian Army, Italian Air Force, Greek Army, Navy, British Army and Navy, Italian Army, no, we didn't have any Navy there, but Italian Army. So you're working with people from all branches of service, and we had an Air Force major in charge of the motor pool, and he says, no E7 drives in my motor pool. He said, you can be a dispatcher, and I didn't want to be a dispatcher. So I found that when I was delivering food to the different sites, we had transmitter station, receiver, fleet broadcast, and NATO underground headquarters, that transmitter station did not have a station maintenance supervisor. I said, hey, so I checked around and that job was available. All the other sites had a chief in charge. So they had third class coming in to the transmitter station. They didn't really have any need for him out there. So they said, well, we'll work a swap in. We'll transfer him to the motor pool. We'll transfer you up. Well, they transferred me out to the transmitter station. So I was station maintenance supervisor. So when I made chief, I went out there and I had 2 Italian civilians, 1 Italian Marcello, which is like a warrant officer, and 1 Italian Army private guy working for me. So we had portable generators on like the Army has on these small trailers, 50-horse motor or whatever. And we had, I don't remember how many we had anymore, 10, 15. I had to make sure that those were all in operating condition. We had a generator, 600-horse generator that provided power to the transmitter station. And so that was our basic job, was to keep the generator ready to go and things like that. See that the grass got mowed and pool table was clean. So I transferred from the motor pool out to transmitter station, and then I stayed there until I got transferred back to the United States again. Well, I was over in Italy for 3 years. Wife came over. We went over with 1 child, came back with 3. And while we were over there, one year we took a camping vacation around Europe. Took, I think it was 20 days or something like this. First 11 days it rained. In the rain, the 2 kids that we had at the time, one was about 2, and the other one was about 3.5. And we got to go all the way up through Italy and got into Germany. We took troop train into Berlin. Spent 2 days in Berlin. That's when they still had the wall around Berlin. And we went up through Austria and Germany, Holland, Belgium. Took train into Paris. We toured Paris. Went down through Luxembourg, down through Switzerland, drove up over the Alps, back down to Naples then. So that was a good tour while we were in Italy. That 3 years. I never did come back home during those 3 years, and we'd write letters. My wife would write letters, and I made 1 phone call, called home when my son was born over there. And when I got a hold of one of my brothers. He was about 10 at the time. And he said, hello, is Mom and Dad around? No. Where are they? I don't know. Well, we had a baby boy. Oh, okay. So that was my telephone call back to the United States during those 3 years.
So what time frame was those 3 years? Early 60s, late 60s?
In Italy was from 1965 to 1968.
Okay. Back up a little bit. You were on ship in the Atlantic for part of your time before you went to Italy.
I was on the Sea Poacher.
Okay. Was the Sea Poacher involved in any...
Yes, Sea Poacher, when I was in Key West from 62 to 65, and we were involved in Cuban blockade. At the time, President was shot, so we had some pretty exciting times that happened. Also, while I was down there, I had a brother report on board, Arnie. He came on board for 2 years while I was there. Cuban blockade wasn't, we went down to Guantanamo Bay. We operated in and out of port during the blockade. Some of the ships and that stayed out in the perimeter all the time, but we go back and forth into port. And nothing real sticks out of my mind as far as what took place there, other than that we were involved in the blockade.
You mentioned you were on that ship when the president was shot.
Yes.
That's a time in history where everybody says you can remember where you were and what you were doing when that occurred.
We were heading out to sea from Key West, and the president was shot, and so they sent us up to, I think it was Charleston, to load out supplies and everything else, take on more shots. And one of the things I remembered on that was, I didn't smoke, but when we were in Norfolk taking on supplies, the guys that smoked ordered their cigarettes. We got green pack Lucky Strikes. Green Lucky Strikes got rid of their green pack at the end of World War II. So that's how old those cigarettes were.
So when the president was shot, did your ship go on a higher security level or anything?
All the submarines left Key West, and we all went up the coast. What was all involved in it, I don't know. But we went up to Charleston, and Norfolk we loaded out weapons, and so we were. Submarines are always ready to go to war at all times, anyway. But excuse me. Other than that, I don't recall too much on. Other than that, I was headed to sea when he was shot.
Okay. The submarines that you were on, were they just torpedoes or were there missiles on there as well?
The ones I was on was all attack submarines, just torpedoes. We could carry, different submarines carry a different number of torpedoes, but they're all with war shots, and we were ready to go at all times.
Okay. So now we got that time frame. Going back to Naples, you were in NATO. Because you were at a radio transmitter, did you have to have a security clearance?
Yes, we had to have top secret security clearance, and in order to go into the NATO underground headquarters, I had to have that. Like I said, I was driving the food truck, and I'd pick up the groceries in the morning from the main NATO base, load them in the truck, and go to each of the sites and go up to the underground headquarters. I couldn't drive into it was a mile inside the mountain, but they come out with one of these battery-operated little trains. They'd load all the stuff on it. We'd go in, and I'd eat lunch out there, and then drive back to Naples each day.
Okay, so after you're done with that shore duty, then what?
Then I was when I first got over there, I went there as shore duty. But shortly after I arrived in Naples, Navy changed their rules and said being stationed there does not count as shore duty. It counts as dead time. So when I was done with Naples, I was still eligible for shore duty. I said, huh? So I put in for recruiting duty, and I got it. And I asked to go to Wisconsin. Well, recruiting duty school was in Bainbridge, Maryland. And I put in for Wisconsin. I was hoping to get Wisconsin Rapids area, but they said they needed me in Madison, so I was assigned to Milwaukee, which is a recruiting district for the state of Wisconsin. And then I was chief recruiter in Madison for 3 years.
And what years were those, do you recall?
That was from 68 to December 71.
Knowing the atmosphere of that time frame, what was it like to be a recruiter in Madison in the 60s?
Madison, we didn't go up by the university. I had, my area of recruiting was Iowa and Dane County. There was 2 recruiters there, and as far as officer recruiters, they came out of Milwaukee, and they would go up to the college campus and recruit. I did administer exams for anybody that wanted to come in and test for officer candidate school. And but while we were there, a lot of the times we didn't have any windows in the front of our recruiting office. Windows were broke out, and there was paint splattered on the doors. And Madison was a pretty rough spot in that period of time. That's when Army Research Center got bombed. And I remember the city buses would go down State Street, and they'd take bars or something and break the windows as the buses would go by. And police cars, and they didn't have any windows in them. They had heavy metal mesh across the windshield. So it wasn't... I didn't feel in danger, but as far as military, Madison was not a welcoming place. One of the funny things I got to tell you about, I and my recruiting partner, Steve Manuel, after we get done each day, we'd head home. And this one day we stopped by a grocery store, and I was a chief, so a chief we had the bridge coat, and Steve had his white hat with pea coat, and some little kid said, "Look at Mom, Popeye." So it was some of those things that come up on recruiting duty are kind of funny. And then another time I was in the store before on the way home, another kid come up and says, "Mom, look, there's a pirate." So
you're actually safer in a submarine than you were in the streets of Madison.
Well, I didn't feel challenged at all that way. But I was glad to get out. They wanted me to stay on longer, and I said, no, I want to go back to sea. So I put in for submarine duty and went back to my first nuclear submarine then.
So you avoided nuke school.
Right.
As much as you could.
Right. I didn't have anything against nuclear submarine, but I didn't want to have to go to nuke school.
Okay.
Because of the math involved. And originally in the Navy, everybody on the submarine had to go to nuke school. But then they changed later on. People that were in the engineering spaces aft, they had to be a nuke qualified. Forward people or crew didn't have to go to nuke school. So I could be on board as an auxiliaryman, which covered air conditioning, hydraulics, air revitalization, and all that stuff, and be on a nuclear submarine.
So what nuke sub did you go to?
I went to the USS Flasher, 613. And I spent 5 years on that. I was selected to be chief of the boat, or master chief of the command, for the last, I don't know what it was, 3 or 4 years that I was on board there.
And that was based out of?
Out of Hawaii. Well, we were in Hawaii, and then the submarine was due for a reactor overhaul, and so we went to Mare Island, California. And that was, the reactor overhaul was a 2-year yard period, which was, I would have never gone to that if I'd known it was going to be like. But they cut the submarine big holes in it and fixed everything that they needed to, put a new reactor in it. And after 2 years, we had to get that thing ready to go back to sea. And we only had about a third of the crew that went into the yard. All the rest were new people coming on board. So we had to get everybody re-qualified on submarine to get this thing ready to go back out to sea again. So that was quite a job between I and the executive officer. We had we made up exams, and we had classes, all the different petty officers from the different divisions submitted questions, what they figured people had to know, so that when we went to sea, everybody would be requalified. So that was a pretty big undertaking to get everybody requalified. And so that was actually a pretty major job to get that done. Then we went to sea, and then we went to San Diego.
So this is now you're into the 70s.
Yes, that would have been, we were in the shipyard from January 75 till January 77.
You and I had talked in the past, and you mentioned that you had some service time in the Vietnam era.
Well, that was on submarine Flasher. So I never set foot on land in Vietnam, but it must have been in 74. Just about all the submarines on the West Coast were off the coast of Vietnam over in that area, and I know we were in Hai Phong Harbor, and we were there for a little over a month. Wait, that would have been not 74. That would have been in when I first reported on board. So that would have been 72 that we were over there. We had, when I reported to Hawaii to go on board Flasher, since I'd never been on a nuclear submarine, and that was drastically different from those old diesel submarines, I went to auxiliary package course, which covered all the auxiliary equipment, hydraulics and air revitalization and things along that line. So I went to that school first, and then I reported on board Flasher.
So without getting into trouble, when you were up in Hai Phong Harbor on a Flasher, what was your mission up there? Do you recall?
Mine was to keep the air revitalized and the hydraulics running in the air and all that. I believe we were mining the harbor. I believe that was what we were doing up there. And I know we were up there for about a month.
Okay.
So other than that, they didn't share with the crew too much of what the whole mission was about. In fact, the captain didn't know, a lot of times the captain didn't know what he was going to be doing until after we got out of the harbor. He'd open up his orders after he got out and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then whatever he shared with the crew, it was up to him what he wanted to share.
But you were pretty high ranking at that time, so you were privy to some of the things that were going on.
Well, yes. I was chief of the boat. For parts of it, when I reported on board, they needed an auxiliaryman because the ones that were there was transferred, and so they needed somebody in that capacity. So a couple of times I reverted back to being in charge of auxiliaries and chief of the boat. I told the XO, I said, I'm not going to do both jobs. And so he said, okay, they assigned somebody else to be chief of the boat while I was.
Okay. We also spoke earlier. Longest time you were underwater?
Longest time underwater, 87 days.
Was that in a nuke sub? Or
that was on the Flasher. We left Hawaii, and normal operations for submarines out of Hawaii was about every year and a half or two, you'd go on a 6-month deployment. And this was a 6-month deployment that we were headed out on. So we left Hawaii, and usually during your 6-month deployment, you pull in Yokosuka, Japan. We were supposed to have Hong Kong, pull into Hong Kong. We're going to Chinhae, Korea, and different places like this. But we got out on station, and the submarine that was supposed to relieve us broke down. So they extended us for a week the week went by and they extended us for 2 more weeks. Then they extended us until further notice. So we were at a point where a submarine loads out 90 days food supply. We had 120 people on board, or 118, and 90-day food supply, and we're on 87 days. So there wasn't much left other than peanut butter and a few other things. But we were supposed to go to Hong Kong about halfway through this deployment, and quite a few of the wives had said made arrangement that they were going to meet us in Hong Kong. Well, since our schedule got all messed up, the squadron let the wives know where we were going to be. And when we pulled into port into Guam, 13 of the wives showed up there. My wife was one of them.
Wow.
And I didn't have a clue she was going to be there. So we were in port there for 10 days. And then we went back out. We did end up going to Hong Kong, but just 2 weeks before we went back to Hawaii. So my wife didn't get to go to Hong Kong, but she did get to go to Guam.
You know, and going with that same line of thinking, you got married. How far into your career did you get married?
When I joined the Navy, I did the first enlistment. I come home, and with no intention of staying in the Navy, because when you first get in, you're telling everybody, I'm getting out, There's no way I'm staying in, no matter what they try to tell you. So I had not planned to go back in. Then when my mom talked me into possibly going back, I did. So I was out for 87 days, or 3 months. Just about 3 months, and at that time, if I re-enlisted, it counted as time served, and I'd come back at the same rate I was. So that's why I come back in. I kept my second class rating, and while I was home those 3 months, I met my wife Arlene. Maybe I got scared, and I re-enlisted, and so I went to Key West, and she came down and saw me in Key West. And I came home, well, that was in July. I went down. I come home for Christmas, or New Year's. I couldn't get off for Christmas, but I was home for New Year's. And then she came down to see me in April, and that's when I proposed to her. And then we got married in that October. So she followed me from Key West to Italy to all around the world.
So during this time, you're married and family's growing. Pretty tough on a wife and family when you're gone for 6, 7, 8 months.
Yes, she did an outstanding job. We had 5 kids. One was born in Charleston, South Carolina. 2 boys born, Greg and Sean were born in Naples, Italy. While I was on recruiting duty, Deanna was born in Madison. And we didn't have, I was in Hawaii for 3 years, we didn't have any over there, but when we got to Vallejo, California, Jeff was born while we were in the shipyard there.
Okay, during all this, your tours and stuff, did you ever go to a USO show at all?
Yes, I did. Well, when we were down in Cuba during the Cuban crisis, let's see, what was his name? Perry Como show was down there. They came down. And that was really the only time I think that I went to any of the stars that showed up for USO. I used to, when I go to airports and stuff, I'd go to USO and have a free meal or whatever. And so the USO was a nice place that you could relax when you went to an airport.
Mm-hmm. So what's the family and doing all the traveling and stuff? You spent 20 years.
Right.
She was with you probably, what,
For 15 of it, about. And I remember one time when we were leaving Key West, Florida, I was trying to get this overseas shore duty deal going, and found out the squadron commander didn't want me to leave Sea Poacher. So he wasn't going to approve nothing. But when we were down in Cuba, submarines in Key West would go down to Cuba for 6 weeks at a time on a rotation from the submarines that were on the East Coast. And my enlistment was coming up. I was supposed to get out in July 1st of, that would have been 65. And we went down to Cuba for those 3 months, and or 6 weeks rather, and I tried to get back for discharge because I said I'm not staying in the Navy, and well, I couldn't get a flight back to Key West, so we ended up a day late getting back from my discharge date. We were at sea, so then I had agreed, and the Navy said, yeah, I could go to Naples. So I got transferred. After I got back to Key West, we had 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I had to be in New York to head to Naples. So we drove home, and on the way home, I remember the kids crying in the car and says, I want to go home. We ain't got home. So, but my 2 oldest kids went to 13 different schools. The first schools they went to were in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. And then while we were in Hawaii, they changed to 2 or 3 different schools because of where I was living at the time out there. And my oldest daughter, when we moved back to Sherry, she was one that says, well, she was always, all of her life, we were in Hawaii, we were in California, we were around big cities, and then we moved back to Sherry, and she was not a happy camper, but she survived.
Okay, submarine duty. I was never into submarines except toured one time. Claustrophobia?
I didn't have any problem with claustrophobia. It never bothered me at all going down. On submarines, they sort people out pretty quickly when you go to sub school. One of the things they do there, they put you in a pressure chamber. Pressure chamber is about, I don't know, something like 20 foot long, 5 foot in diameter. Seats on both sides. They got an airlock on the end. They put you in and your knees are bumping as you're sitting in there. And they put you under 50 pounds of pressure. Build up air pressure. They could keep it cool in there, which would make it nice, but no, they don't. They let the temperature go up, and it's noisy. And so that's a deal there that if you can't get through that pressure, as they're building up the pressure, you have to equalize. You hold your nose and you blow, and you can hear your ears pop. Mm-hmm. And if you can't, you hold up your hand, and they'll wait one time, or they'll give you one chance. And if you do it twice, they out the airlock and you're out of submarines. So I didn't want to lose that. One time I thought my ears were going to break for sure, but I toughed it out to get through that part. But that's one way they sort. Another one was escape training. In New London, they had one out in Hawaii. They put you in an airlock on the side of a water tank, and you put on a life jacket, and they push you out. You go to the surface for, on submarines they have a escape trunk. This is basically what it's a training for, that if the submarine would sink in shallow water, you could go in the escape trunk, put on a life jacket, build up the air pressure, open the hatch, and you escape. But realistically, it is more, I think, to keep everybody else happy.
Okay, using the word realistic, the movies.
Oh,
You said some movies kind of exaggerate on how much
Well,
space you have as
right.
compared to
Some
what
of them, some of these submarine movies, they're in there with machine guns and all this other stuff, and that doesn't happen. But submarine Hunt for Red October was very realistic as far as capability of what the submarine can do and things. So Hunt for Red October was a very realistic movie as far as I was concerned. There's parts of it that are a little exaggerated, but my son was my oldest son joined the Navy and qualified on the Houston, and the Houston was used for filming part of that Hunt for Red October. He wasn't on board when they did that, but so the submarine, I think some of it was filmed on board, but very limited because you don't have any ballrooms. So they're all pretty cramped spaces.
Okay, so did you get any awards, citations? Excuse me.
Yes, Navy Achievement Medal I got. That was for the period of time I was on the Flasher, getting ready for that Westpac cruise where we spent 87 days submerged, and then through the shipyard. And so for that period of time, I got Navy Achievement Medal. That was the highest ranking one that I got.
Okay. What was your highest rank?
E9 Master Chief.
Okay, so you were...
I made one rate at every command, so I said that's why I had to get out of the Navy. So I reported on Tang as a fireman, went to the recommissioned Lizardfish, made third class, went back to the Tang, made second, got on the Sea Poacher, made first, made chief in Naples, Italy, made E8 on recruiting duty, and back on Flasher, I made 9.
Okay.
So then I had to get out because I didn't have any choice.
Okay, getting out. What was life like for you after the Navy?
Well, I retired in 77, had 5 kids. Youngest one was 2 years old. And my ambition at that time was I was going to go farming with my brother. And I worked, well, Navy retirement at that time wasn't very much. There was a lot of increases in retirement pay in the early 80s. The Navy, or the all military, had a lot of increases during that period of time, and people that were retired also got that retirement pay increase. So that was always a big help, but I worked construction for 3 years after I got out of the Navy, laying block, pouring cement, building barns. And then there was an opportunity to get in a paper mill, so I got in a paper mill. They had a good medical program going at the time, and so I worked at Consolidated Papers in Wisconsin Rapids for 20 years, and I retired in February '99 from the paper mill.
Did you ever take advantage of the GI Bill at all?
Yes, when I got out of the Navy, I went to Farm Business Management School in Marshfield, and because I was going to go farming, and the reason I did and ended up not farming was this was in the early 80s, I think, yeah, or late 70s. Interest rates was up about 18%, and we were going to have to buy another farm in order for 2 families. Our home farm wasn't big enough for 2 families. So that's when I said, no, I'll go to paper mill. And so then I was out of the farming business too.
Okay.
I did help there later on. But
What lessons did you learn in the military that served you the best in life?
boy, I don't know. I enjoyed Navy all the way through. As far as learning particular lessons, I don't know if I learned a whole lot.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to mention about your time in service?
Well, let's see. Let's come to your questions here to start with, if I could, just to get a...
Would you recommend the military to anybody?
Yes, I think I'd recommend Navy. I always say best Marine is submarine, but some people don't like that idea. But I enjoyed military life. I had my son went in Navy. He qualified on Houston, and I had two brothers that were on submarines. Bob was on the Bashaw, and then my brother Arnie come on board. He put in for brother duty, and I figured, boy, brother duty. I could see maybe they'll send him to the same port, you know. But he was on the aircraft carrier at the time and put in for it, and so he got sub school, and then he come down to Key West, and they said he's going on sea poacher. And the chief of the boat asked me, he says, "Do you want him to work for you?" I said, "I don't know." Because he was the engineman at the time, and when I first got on board submarines, I was in the engine room, worked on overhauled engines at sea and everything else. And he says, "Well, we'll try him in the auxiliary gang." We had 4 people in the auxiliary gang on the sea poacher, and so he come on board, and he was one of my best workers. And no problem with him at all while on board. It was nice to have him on board for a couple of years. So other than that...
Go to any reunions at all?
Oh, reunions, yes. I set up the reunion for the USS Flasher in 1990. I told my wife, I said, I'd like to set up a reunion for Flasher. And we used to keep in contact through Christmas cards. So I send out Christmas cards to all those that I knew were on the Flasher. And I said, I want to hold a reunion. And the first one we held, I think, was in 1996. And we had something like eight or 10 guys showed up. And then, we kept this program going as far as other, every Christmas I'd send out letters and ask them to send me addresses. And right now, Flasher gets together and has a reunion every 2 years. And we have over 300 people on our roster. And I'd say 50% of those that show up for the reunions, I served with while I was on board Flasher. So it's always fun to go to a ship's reunion. I go to sea poacher reunions and I go to Flasher reunions, and they're always a lot of fun. And I always try to tell people when they're in service, keep addresses. If nothing else, get their home address, because they're moving all the time. So if you get their home address, you can keep contact with some of the people that you're in with. And so it's always been fun to have reunions and to see these old shipmates again.
Old being the key word.
Well, they all look older than I. Not necessarily.
Right. Larry, thank you. This has been really interesting. Thank you very much for your service.
You're welcome.
And thank you very much for watching.